We had always wanted adventure. That was the thing about Jake and me. We weren't content with beaches and resorts. We craved something raw, something that would bring us closer to the earth, closer to the untamed parts of the world that few people dared to explore. When Jake suggested a camping trip in Alaska, I didn't hesitate. I'd seen pictures of the vast wilderness, snow-capped mountains, endless forests, and rivers as clear as glass. It sounded perfect. A chance to disconnect from the modern world and reconnect with each other. The flight to Anchorage was uneventful, filled with excitement and a bit of nervous energy. From there, we drove deeper into the wilderness, past the last signs of civilization, the roads narrowing until even the asphalt gave way to dirt. It was like entering another world, one where humans were merely visitors, passing through a land that belonged to something older, something wild. We parked the truck near a trailhead, far from any signs of people, and set off with our packs. The air was crisp, the kind that feels almost too clean to breathe. It felt freeing. Jake led the way, navigating with the confidence that made me love him. He was always the fearless one, always ready for the next big thing. I followed, my eyes scanning the horizon, taking in the towering pines and the distant mountains that loomed like sleeping giants. As we hiked deeper into the wilderness, the sense of isolation grew. The forest closed in around us, the tall trees casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. The only sounds were the crunch of our boots on the forest floor and the occasional call of a bird. It felt like we had left the world behind. I felt safe with Jake. He always knew what he was doing, always knew how to handle any situation. By the time we set up camp, the sun was already starting to sink below the mountains. The light turned golden, casting an almost magical glow over everything. Jake built a fire while I set up the tent. We were both in high spirits, laughing and joking about the ridiculous stories we'd heard about Alaskan wildlife. Bears, wolves, moose, sure, they existed, but we were prepared. We had bear spray, food stored properly in a canister, and we were careful. Jake wasn't one to take unnecessary risks, despite his love for adventure. That night, as we sat around the campfire, we listened to the sounds of the forest. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. But as the night wore on, the peace began to feel oppressive. The silence between the sounds stretched out longer and longer, like the forest itself was holding its breath. "Do you hear that?" Jake asked, his voice low, breaking the silence. I paused, listening, but there was nothing. Just the crackling of the fire and the faint rustle of the trees. "Hear what?" I asked, though my heart had already started to beat a little faster. "Exactly, there's nothing. No birds, no animals, nothing." He was right. The forest had gone eerily still, like something had pressed pause on the natural world. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease creeping over me, but it was hard to ignore. We were deep in the wilderness, far from anyone, far from help. It was a chilling realization. "Maybe it's just the wind," I offered, though even I didn't believe it. Jake stood up, peering into the darkness beyond the firelight. His face was tense, the playful confidence from earlier gone. "I don't know, but something doesn't feel right." The firelight flickered, casting long shadows across the trees, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move in the distance. Something large. My breath caught in my throat, and I grabbed Jake's arm. "There," I whispered, pointing toward the edge of the clearing. Jake squinted, his hand instinctively moving to the knife strapped to his belt. For a long moment, we stood there, staring into the darkness, waiting. But nothing moved. The shadows remained still, the night silent. "I think we're just freaking ourselves out," Jake said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. We sat back down, trying to shake off the nerves, but the sense of unease lingered. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced that something was watching us from the trees. The fire seemed smaller now, its warmth no longer comforting. Eventually, we decided to call it a night. Jake doused the fire, and we crawled into the tent. But even as I lay there, wrapped in my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The tent was pitch black, and for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it hit me. the camping trip, the wilderness, the strange silence from earlier. I lay there listening, trying to figure out what had woken me. There it was, a sound, faint but unmistakable, the soft crunch of something moving outside the tent. My heart skipped a beat. It was close, too close. I reached out and grabbed Jake's arm, shaking him awake. "Jake, wake up," I whispered urgently. He stirred, groggy, but quickly came to his senses when he heard the noise. We both lay there, frozen, listening. The sound grew louder, something moving just outside the tent, something big. My mind raced. Was it a bear? A moose? Whatever it was too close. Jake reached for the bear spray, his movements slow and deliberate. We both knew that if it was a bear, we needed to stay calm, make noise, and not startle it. But this didn't feel like a normal animal encounter. There was something wrong about the way it moved. Too deliberate, too silent, save for the occasional crunch of leaves beneath its feet. Suddenly, the tent shook violently, like something had brushed against it. I stifled a scream, my heart racing so fast I thought it might explode. Jake sat up, holding the bear spray in one hand and his knife in the other. And then, in an instant, the tent was ripped open. A massive shape loomed over us, its outline barely visible in the dim light of the dying fire. It was enormous, towering above us, its breath hot and rancid, filling the air with a smell that made my stomach turn. It wasn't a bear, at least not any bear I had ever seen. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and its body was grotesque, covered in matted fur and scarred flesh. It looked ancient, like something that had crawled out of a nightmare. Jake reacted first, spraying the bear spray directly at its face, but the creature barely flinched. It let out a low, guttural growl, a sound so deep it seemed to vibrate through the ground, and swiped at Jake with one massive paw. I screamed as Jake was thrown across the tent, his body crashing into the canvas with a sickening thud. The creature lunged forward, its jaws snapping, and I saw Jake's eyes widen in terror. He barely had time to react before the creature's teeth sank into his shoulder, ripping through flesh and bone like it was nothing. Blood sprayed across the tent, the metallic smell overwhelming. Jake screamed, a sound I will never forget, a sound filled with pain and fear and the awful realization that he wasn't going to make it. "Run!" he shouted, his voice strained as he struggled against the creature. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear, watching in horror as the creature tore into him, its jaws dripping with blood. It was feeding on him, devouring him alive, and there was nothing I could do. Finally, something inside me snapped, and I scrambled out of the tent, stumbling over the rough ground as I ran. I could still hear Jake's screams behind me, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't look back. Tears streamed down my face as I sprinted through the forest, my mind screaming at me to keep moving, to get as far away as possible. But the creature wasn't done. I heard it behind me, crashing through the trees, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. It was hunting me now. The thought made my blood run cold. I ran faster, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest, but it was gaining on me. I could hear its breathing, heavy, labored, and terrifyingly close. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I tried to dial for help. But there was no signal. We were too deep in the wilderness, too far from civilization. There was no one coming to save me. In a panic, I stumbled off the trail, hoping to lose the creature in the dense underbrush. I could barely see where I was going, branches slapping at my face and arms, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. But no matter how fast I ran, it was always there, just behind me, just out of sight, but close enough that I could feel its presence. It was toying with me, letting me think I had a chance when, deep down, I knew I didn't. Finally, my body gave out. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, my limbs trembling with exhaustion. I could hear the creature moving through the trees, its footsteps slow and deliberate now. It was close, too close. I crawled toward a nearby tree, my hands digging into the dirt as I tried to pull myself up. My vision was blurry, my mind foggy. With my last ounce of strength, I pulled myself into a narrow crevice between two massive boulders, barely squeezing through. The beast thrashed nearby, its breath hot and furious as it searched for me. I held my breath, trembling, praying it wouldn't find me. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds of its snarling and heavy footsteps faded into the distance. I stayed hidden, heart pounding, until I was certain it was gone. Exhausted and covered in blood, I had survived, but the wilderness had taken everything else. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this intense story of survival, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales. Leave a comment below on what you thought of the story or what you do in that situation. And remember, always stay alert, because you never know what's lurking out there in the wild. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.